Okay, picking up where we left off on page 268, beginning to talk about wireless communication. And so here's some classic examples. Radio makes sense, right? And so this is like Wi-Fi and those kind of things. We have a small radio transmitter and a receiver. And an awful lot of interesting things here, but we're not going to get into that much detail. Microwave, and there's two different kinds of microwaves. There's the microwave radio. You've probably driven down the interstate and seen these towers, right? Those are probably microwave relay towers for telephone service. Okay, there's also microwave setup that are done with satellites. Okay, and then infrared. And infrared is sort of like your TV remote, that kind of thing. Infrared signal for that, and very short range, and basically has to be line of sight. You can probably imagine that if I have a satellite that's beaming down to the ground, it probably has a pretty huge swath of ground. It could be like a third of the United States being bathed with that signal, okay? So it's not like I can point it directly at one dish, right, on the ground, and no one else can hear. So, yeah, microwave, particularly satellite type, yeah, you're going to have to, highly susceptible to interception, because anyone, anywhere, could be 100 miles away, can put up an antenna and receive what that signal is. Okay, so we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but not too much. Okay, so they break these things up into different categories. The first one is sort of like short range. So what are your possibilities for short range? The first one is called near field communication. This is actually pretty doggone cool. It's relatively new. Smartphones, almost, well, I don't know about all, but an awful lot of the smartphones have near field communication. This is like Google Pay and Apple Pay, things like that, where you have a payment system at a kiosk kind of a scenario, like at a checkout stand, and you take your phone and you bring it within really, 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 really close range. And the way it's designed, the signal has to be within just a couple of inches. And if you're standing like a foot away with a snoop, you have like a radio, and you're trying to break into this guy's bank account because he's paying with Google Pay, and so I'm like a foot away, it's not going to work. It's that good. It's actually pretty doggone safe just because of the physics that they use to establish the communication. So the range is incredibly short, but on purpose. You see what I'm saying? It's not like it's a deficiency. It's a feature. My God, they really wanted it to be doggone close. Okay, so that's near field communication. Okay, Bluetooth. You guys probably know what all this stuff is. I have a Bluetooth, microphone earbud that I use with my phone, or I have Bluetooth speakers that I use with my phone. And Bluetooth is relatively small range. We're talking about 10, 20 feet. So if I had a little portable speaker, a little battery-powered portable speaker, and set it on my desk, and I'm playing music through my phone, if I get up and leave the room, well, it's probably going to stop until I get back. It's 20 or 30 feet. That's about it. But it's it was originally designed for portable devices, which means it's not incredibly robust. It's not incredibly fast. And the reason it's not fast is because they really didn't intend for you to be consuming a lot of power, because they knew this was going to be on a portable device. In other words, it's not like they're going to hook up and put gigabytes of data through this thing. It was designed for relatively low volume, low impact, and low battery use. So Bluetooth is just kind of cool. It is done with a radio, but just different. Ultra wideband. This is kind of weird. These you will probably never see. What happens is, let's say that I'm a nuclear sub under the Antarctic. Under the North Pole, and I want to send a message, but I want to make dang sure that there's no way that other people could intercept my message by blocking the radio frequencies. What I would do is I would take a message, scrunch it down into an incredibly small blip, but splat it across the entire radio spectrum. Huge bandwidth. Now I'm using the term bandwidth in its proper context. Huge bandwidth, but tiny little spike. And we're talking really tiny spike. tiny enough so that, yes, it's blasting over the AM range, but you won't even hear it. Okay, that's how fast this thing is. Tiny, tiny, tiny things. Anyway, I've seen some of this being demoed, but I don't know anything about it. So, 50 picoseconds of radio burst over the entire range. Phew. Okay, maybe if you're in the CIA or the military, you might know what this is all about. But practical sense in a business world, no. You are not going to use ultraviolet. All right. Infrared. These are, instead of using radio, now we're using light beams. So I'm sitting at TV, and I got my remote, and I pointed at the TV and go, doink. Now, if my wife walks in front of me when I go, doink, the channels don't change. So it's line of sight. I'm essentially shining a flashlight on the TV. Okay, so the TV has to have somewhere on there, it has to have a little receiver for this infrared. That's how that works. Zigbee. Before I started teaching this course, I'd never heard of Zigbee, and it's a wireless system really designed for like home appliances and home safety kind of things. I don't see it very often, but apparently it does exist. Okay, let's continue. The next one talks about the medium range. Okay, the medium range stuff is probably stuff that you have heard of before. All right. So Wi-Fi is the most classic example of a wireless medium range. And by the way, I'm not going to hold you to memorizing this kind of stuff. Okay, what does 802.11b have? No. That's not what this is all about. So yes, there's a bunch of alphabet soup here in the wireless protocols, and we're getting progressively faster as the generations increase. My wireless setup is a 802.11 AC, and most of my devices are AC devices, but I've got some older ones that are transmitting on G or N, and so it's kind of backwards compatible. So my machine, if you have a device that's full-blown AC, well, then it'll be talking really quick. But if you have a device that's kind of older and doesn't support that, well, then it'll just talk one of the others. Okay, so wireless. I think everyone kind of really understands what Wi-Fi is all about. Wi-Fi has a few kind of issues. I mean, to make it work, I have to have like a hotspot, right? So I have to have somewhere. Dang, picture didn't show up. Okay. In order for wireless to work, it has to be wired somewhere. Okay. So let's say you're at a coffee shop that offers wireless access to its customers. Well, they probably have an honest-to-God cable coming into their business for their internet service, and then that cable gets connected to the wireless box, and then it goes wireless thereafter. You hear crazy stories on the internet where people go to the store and they'll buy a wireless device, a wireless router, take it home, plug it in, and then call up and say, hey, it ain't working. And the guy says, well, what is your internet service? And they says, we don't have any. And they said, well, you need to have internet service to make this thing work. And he said, why? It's wireless. Doesn't need any wires. Well, obviously it does need wires. At one end of the scenario, it's got to have wires. Okay. In the mobile world, you would have basically, your phone would have a Wi-Fi receiver and transmitter both, right? That's kind of what it works. And it's designed to be battery saving, so an awful lot of phones don't have near the range as, a laptop. And it's not because, again, it's poor quality. It's really kind of designed it that way. I mean, laptops are kind of sort of designed, they have big batteries, and you could very easily just, plug them in to be recharged, and your phones are not like that. They're really, most likely your charger is going to be in your car, or you leave it at home. You're not normally going to carry it in your pocket or purse. So yeah, they're using the exact same standards. It's just they're not quite as robust. The range for these guys is typically about 100 feet if you're indoors. Somewhere around that, and of course that all depends on what if you're in a a house that's made, with wooden walls and plaster versus, cinder block. Or I was in a metal building one time, and geez, the Wi-Fi service was horrible. Outside, if you're out in the open, like you're trying to have an outdoor cafe, or I'm into my backyard, the range is pretty doggone high. You can get up to about like 300 feet with just a standard Wi-Fi guy if there's no walls in place. So that's how that works. There's a table here talking about the standards. Okay, I guess there's not. Well, in the book, the standards, table 6.3 on page 271, talks about all these guys. Okay. The next one is talking about wide area networks. So we talked about short range, we're talking about medium range, and now we're talking about long range. I don't know why they didn't just say long range, but they didn't. So there's a term for this, and it's called a WAN, a wide area network, WAN. Okay. And we kind of sort of mentioned before that there's lots of different ways you can do this. One of them is microwave. So you have a microwave tower, and it sends to another microwave tower, and sends to a microwave, then finally gets onto a wire somewhere, and then goes to grandma's house. Okay, that's basically how that works. These guys have to be line of sight, and they're somewhat directed. The microwave, satellite can't be picky. It can't point directly to a spot on the earth very well. But these guys, I can line them up, to point to the next tower with some degree of accuracy. Now, these guys can be about 30 miles apart. Okay, if you don't believe that the earth is round, you may not agree with this statement, but the curvature of the earth, if you had a perfectly flat, spot of ground out in the middle of Kansas, then, the towers had to be about 30 miles apart just because of the curvature of the earth. Okay, so these things are how that works. Okay. Satellite, not quite so much. I can have satellite communication. These are generally satellites that are called geosynchronous satellites, which means they don't whiz around. They stay right up as the Earth moves. They stay right with them, so they're always above wherever the heck they're supposed to be. So they don't wobble around. They don't circle the Earth. They stay right over Texas, for example. They'll stay right over Texas and just hang. Because of that, they're pretty doggone far away. 22,000 miles or so, in order to stay in geosynchronous orbit. Okay, and they send messages down, and again, they get rebroadcast to other kinds of things. All right. The next thing you talk about is phones, and on page 273, they talk about 3G and 4G and LTE and all this alphabet soup, and it used to be that there was some terms in here that actually meant something. And the G stands for generation, the third generation and the fourth generation. And it used to be just completely marketing speak until the courts got involved, and they said, wait a minute, because, my second generation may not be the same as your second generation. So if Verizon says, well, I have 3G, and AT&T says, no, I have 4G, and then somebody else says, well, I've got 5G, and, it just became a stupid, marketing race for terms. And so the courts got involved, and they basically said, no. If you're going to say generation, we want that to be backed up by something that's the same. So they came up with a set of standards for the minimum and maximum, oddly. Minimum and maximum range of speeds that you could claim is 3G, 4G, or whatever. Okay. So, unfortunately, the terms have kind of been thrown about. LTE is just another one that's thrown about. And that basically means better than 4G. 4G, in fact, most of them say 4G LTE. Anyway, and again, it's all just alphabet soup. And the idea is, the bigger G and the most letters after the G is the fastest. How's that for a stupid way of looking at it? Okay, this is a good place to stop for the 15-minute mark. We'll pick this thing up again in just a few.